Football season is underway, so now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's free bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just sign up with promo code BLUEWIRE. FanDuel is great because it has all of your favorite bets, from the money line to point spreads to player props. The app is safe, secure, and easy to use, and you get your winnings paid fast. So sign up today with promo code BLUEWIRE for your no-sweat first bet. Make every moment more this season with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. 21 plus in select states. First online real money wager only. Refund issued as non-withdrawable free bets that expire in 14 days. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit fanduel.com/RG in Colorado, Iowa, Michigan, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Illinois, or Virginia. 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT-STEP to 53342 in Arizona. 1-888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org/chat in Connecticut. 1-800-9-WITH-IT in Indiana. 1-800-522-4700 or visit KS Gambling Help in Kansas. 1-877-770-STOP in Louisiana. 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369 in New York. The Tennessee Red Line, 1-800-889-9789 in Tennessee, 1-800-522-4700 in Wyoming, or visit www.1800gambler.net in West Virginia.
Hey everyone, welcome to The Final Four is Not on the Schedule. I'm your host Eric, alongside with expert analyst Rod. Thanks for joining us on the best MSU basketball podcast featuring in-depth recruiting, game matchup, and post-game analysis. We dive deep to give you the best tools to enjoy the Spartans and impress your friends and family. Hey everyone, it's Eric alongside Rod. Here we're going to go over a pregame for Gonzaga, #2 team in the country, and we're playing on the aircraft carrier for the second time Michigan State's played on a carrier. The last time was against North Carolina back when Obama was president, and now it's his vice president, President Biden, who'll be there, I suppose, in attendance. This is going to be a marquee matchup. It's on Veterans Day, 11/11. This is one of those days that Izzo had not originally had planned on the schedule, but this game, I think, came together pretty quickly in about 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah.
And then Izzo felt it absolutely had to happen with Michigan State. He felt some ownership of this game. I think he and Ben Hollis came up with it originally when they played North Carolina, and he just couldn't imagine someone else playing this game. And so it's, a great marquee matchup for Michigan State, great exposure for our team. And, it's going to be Big Ten country out in California. So this is going to be a great opportunity for
the heartland. Yeah.
Yeah, we joke, but it's not long. It will be, before we know it, it'll be
2 years. Yeah.
So yeah, again, Gonzaga is a really great story. And this is, I remember when Gonzaga first sort of appeared on the scene, really for most, Americans, about 25 years ago, where it has gone from a very small D1 school, most notable for producing John Stockton, NBA All-Star, and there's a small school in Spokane, Washington, and then through the 3 coaches basically has gone to the point where now it is garnering national recruiting muscle all over, and is a perennial, at least Final Four competitor, or someone who is has a chance to make the Final Four every year. It's pretty amazing. And in some ways it's a great story about, the little school that could. There's no reason that it should have happened, but it did. But it also probably puts a little bit extra pressure on every other school, because every other school has got to be asking themselves, well, why not us, right? Why can't we achieve something like this? I mean, it's almost like a perfect storm that it has to happen in order for this to work out. But it's a cool story. I mean, they have not yet won the national championship. They've been there. They've been to the finals. So I guess, original impression of this game, it's obviously a big game for Michigan State. We're unranked going to this game, and Gonzaga's, the big giant gorilla, which I think if someone told you 30 years ago, you would have never believed that could be possibly the case, but here we are.
It's a really interesting story. I, just as a personal side, in the early 90s, I went to law school in the Bay Area in San Francisco, and I had a classmate who actually played for Gonzaga. Um, he was giant. He was like giant to normal human beings. He was like 6'8", probably 230 or so, big guy. And at that time, Gonzaga was known for one thing. John Stockton went there. That was it. In fact, they didn't even make a postseason tournament and they've been playing basketball since the early 1900s. I think 1915. They did not make a postseason tournament until the 93-94 season when they went to the NIT. It took them that long to get to any postseason game. Yeah. They then made the ends, but that season when they made under Dan Fitzgerald, they made the NIT. That kind of started this rejuvenation. So when Stockton was there, for example, they didn't make any postseason play. He never played in the NCAA tournament. It shows you how hard it can be. In 2 of the next 5 seasons after that, they actually made the NCAA tournament. And then they made the NIT in some of those years where they didn't qualify for the NCAA tournament. And that was partially under Fitzgerald, but he eventually stepped down to focus on being the athletic director. And he was succeeded briefly by Dan Monson. Now, Dan Monson, some of our listeners may remember, had a period of time where he was the head coach at Minnesota. He was also the son of Don Monson, who was an assistant on Judd Heathcote's staff and was part of the coaching staff that won the national title in 1979. So Dan Monson actually spent some of his high school years in East Lansing. So a little bit of a Michigan State. And there are a lot of connections between the two programs, Obviously, I'm sure most all of our listeners recall that Judd Heathcote relocated to Spokane when once he retired from MSU and became a very big booster of Gonzaga's while he was out there. Was very interested in the program, supportive, had deep connections with them. And so through that, Mark Few and Tom Izzo have developed a relationship. But really, what we've come to know as Gonzaga is a result of Mark Few. So Mark Few was on Dan Monson's staff when Dan Monson decided. Now try to picture this move in 2022 to show you how much has changed. Yeah. Dan Monson leaves Gonzaga after, I think it was a Sweet 16 run in 99. It was either Sweet 16 or Elite 8. Leaves Gonzaga to take the Minnesota job, which at the time, believe it or not, if you're too young to remember that, made total sense in 1999. Yeah. Total sense. And Mark Few gets elevated to the head coaching position. Mark Few takes what had been a nice story, but hey, there's a lot of programs you can find in America that have a solid 4 or 5 year run. He took that program and continued to build it and build it and build it. So for many years, I think they succeeded based on a certain kind of recruiting model, which was they would find undervalued West Coast kids, and they had a lot of those kind of guys. And then they supplemented that with a lot of foreign players. If you think back to Gonzaga over the aughts and even into this decade, or the last decade, I mean the teens, there were a lot of foreign players who were really, really key guys for Gonzaga. And a lot of that success in recruiting those, identifying and successfully recruiting those players went to a longtime assistant on Mark Few's staff, a guy named Tommy Lloyd, who is now the head coach of Arizona and whose son, Liam, might have irritated you last night because he was on Northern Arizona's team and he was running his mouth a lot. But anyway, so Mark Few used that to build his program. And the final step of their evolution has come, I would say, within the last 5 years, where they are actually now able to go compete against anybody head to head for blue chip American high school players and win those recruitments. So if you go back last year, Chet Holmgren, who was consensus best player in his class, Gonzaga beats everybody for him, right? the year before, and why am I drawing a blank on his name? The point guard from Minnesota, Jalen Suggs. Same story. Everybody in America wanted Jalen Suggs. Gonzaga gets him. Those are two kids from Minnesota. They're not from the Pacific
Yeah.
Northwest. And he goes and gets those guys, beats everybody on them. Drew Timme, who's the star of this team, has been an amazing story for them as a 4-year player, despite how good he's been. Drew Timme's recruitment accelerated to the point that by the stage that he committed to Gonzaga, he had heavyweights, including Michigan State, involved in that recruitment across the board. Could have gone almost anywhere. Goes to Gonzaga. He's a Texas kid with Michigan roots. His dad is from Michigan. So pretty impressive and amazing. And it's been done at a very steady pace where they have continued to evolve over time. And now, you mentioned, you called them a gorilla or heavyweight, whatever you said. They're in everybody's top 5. I think they're number 2 generally. That's why we use that number in the rankings, generally behind North Carolina. And that nobody bats an eye. That's expected. No. And we saw news last week reported that Gonzaga may join the Big 12. As I don't know whether it's basketball only or whether it's all sports besides football. They don't have a football program. I'm not sure what form that will take. But if that's true and that comes to pass, my God, what an incredible statement. And there had already been stories about the Big East trying to get them. So yeah, it is a remarkable story. We shouldn't lose sight of it, that it where they came from to where they are now. Let's say if you're 35, probably most of your life following the sport in any detail, Gonzaga has been a factor, but it wasn't always that way. And I think you're right too, in that it puts a lot of pressure on other programs. Butler is a good example. Now, Butler has done a great job of coming from, where they were in the Horizon League all the way to the Big East. But you see that they are now a program that, demands winning, to the point that they fired an alum, Lavelle Jordan, who had struggled a little bit, and they brought back Thad Matta out of retirement. They're serious about winning. Loyola of Chicago has had this kind of evolution where they went from the Horizon to the Missouri Valley, and I think, are they in the American now? They've moved up another level.
I thought they're the A10.
Not in the
maybe
Big
the
East.
A10. I think the A10.
A10, that's right. I'm sorry, not the American, the A10. A similar thing. We'll see how Drew Valentine handles that. But again, I think, as I said at the outset, a lot of programs have a 4 or 5 year run where they can rise up from a mid-major level and really have a nice sustained period of success. But to do what Gonzaga has done, that is still a unique story. Nobody else has really done that in recent years. And it's incredibly impressive, and it's really mostly attributable to Mark Few.
Yeah, I was going to just add that I think the important part there is that Mark Few has been so permanent as a coach for 20 years almost now.
And that's another, we shouldn't lose sight of that.
Right, because he could have left for 20 other programs, right? That's the amazing
thing. For
thing.
Years, the betting was, all right, well, some big program is going to come along and take him. And it hasn't happened. And then at different points, people wondered about the NBA, and that hasn't happened. He has done basically an equivalent to what Tom Izzo has done at Michigan State. Although it's far, far more remarkable because of where Gonzaga was. At least, Tom Izzo was always in the Big Ten. He was at a school that had won a national championship and been to Final Fours before he ever got there. Mark Few's story is even more amazing in that respect. And I think it's a testament to the idea, which is something we've heard Izzo say a lot over the years, is, if you've got a good deal, if the deal is good for the school and the deal is good for you, why leave? Why assume that it's going to be better somewhere else? And I think, and now, partially because he's no longer a young coach, but the idea of Mark Few leaving for anywhere would be just stunning. I mean, I don't think it's going to happen. I suspect he's going to retire in the Gonzaga job, you know?
Oh yeah. The court will be named after him, or the arena.
Yeah,
I mean,
there's
sure.
no reason
All that
why.
stuff.
Why would he move at this point? At this stage, I used to think maybe a decade or so ago, well, the one thing that would be easier if you went to an Indiana or a Kentucky or a place like that is you would no longer have to continue to work so hard to land, foreign kids and blend them into your thing. It would be easier to recruit the truly elite domestic high school talent. Well, he's long past that.
Yeah.
He's able, as I just said, he didn't do it in this year's class, but the two previous years, he got top 5 players. That's unbelievable. And let me tell you something else. If you haven't been to Spokane, the fact that you're drawing that and you built this in Spokane, and I think the Pacific Northwest is unbelievable. I think it is. I think it's the most beautiful part of the country if you look at Oregon and Washington. But Spokane itself really isn't all that great. It's amazing that he's done what he's done.
And I think the one other thing I'd add to this whole discussion is, we were talking a couple episodes ago. We touched on a few times on the NCAA tournament and its importance in college basketball in general, with the spectacle of the tourney and the hope that it provides all these teams. 350 teams have a chance of making the dance. This is a really good testament to what the power of the NCAA tournament really is. I mean, we've seen many coaches who take success in the NCAA tournament and they get a bigger coaching job. They go from Siena to Iowa, for instance, but you look at what Few has done, and because he stayed and he had that success, he's been able to grow that program primarily because of the postseason appearances, because then you can get, if you're going to be a bigger matchups, you're going to guarantee the tournament exposure. Players are going to want to play for you. And, you have to have everything fit into the right place. You got to have the right guys helping you recruit. Obviously, you got to have the good success. I mean, you have to have a league that you can dominate enough to get that one bid league. Anyway, but it's all because of the NCAA tournament. And so you worry about, change the NCAA tournament where now the exposure is not worth as much, or, the specialness of making it to the dance. Right.
And what enabled this story to start was the David versus Goliath element of it in 1999 under Dan Monson. The fact that Gonzaga was rising up, and we see stories like this periodically. Last year we saw it with St. Peter's, right? And you talked about coaches. Shaheen Holloway rode that right into the Seton Hall job, his alma mater, off a tremendous run at St. Peter's. We've seen it, time and time again. We've seen that story. Shaka Smart, my God, he's leveraged an unbelievable career out of one run.
VCU, yeah.
So you lose that, and I don't know that in my lifetime I expect to ever see another Gonzaga. I kind of doubt it, because that's so unlikely to begin with. But boy, the hope and the dreams of that, you're right. It really relies on the NCAA tournament. I mean, Gonzaga has done this on two ends of the system. Most major conference schools, the season is largely about the conference regular season, right? I mean, the NCAA tournament is when everybody gets judged, but the bulk of the time that you're spent engaged in it is in conference play. With Gonzaga, the attention is certainly on the NCAA tournament, but it's also historically been this time of year in November and December, because they've known, well, we're not going to have marquee games in the West Coast Conference, even though I think that league has gotten steadily better over time, to the point where you have St. Mary's, which is kind of a B- Gonzaga.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm.
BYU joined that league, and they've been very competitive. Occasionally you'll have another program here or there that'll rise up, but like San Francisco last year. But they've known, hey, we just don't have marquee programs, marquee wins in our conference schedule. So they've consequently taken a page from the Tom Izzo, anybody, anytime, anywhere notebook, and they are a fixture in November and December. You talked about Michigan State being involved in this aircraft carrier game. It's also no accident that Gonzaga is in it, because Gonzaga has continually looked to put themselves in high attention situations. And they did that, at a point when they weren't quote unquote Gonzaga yet. They did that, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, in order to help elevate the program. And it's worked. If you think about it, in November and December, people who are interested in college basketball will always see a lot of Gonzaga, because that's their opportunity to get attention getting high stakes opponents, and they'll play them. They'll play anybody.
And I think that's some of the brilliance of Tom Izzo. It's for the same reasons that he has elevated Michigan State as a national brand because of, playing these anyone anywhere and being successful, obviously at times, but the Champions Classic, the aircraft carrier games. And so he has built a brand that we saw. It's with the recruitment of Jackson Kohler. We saw with Cone Carr, and then Gehrig Normand. Without a doubt, it's because of the national brand that he's built. And I think, to Graham Couch's point a couple episodes ago, where we were talking to him, I think Izzo probably underplayed what his value was as a national brand until recently. I think he's recognized that he can go out and just kind of snatch people, and he's never really tried before. And I think now he recognized that he is a big deal, and he's built it, maybe not intentionally, but I think in part.
I would only differ with Graham in this sense. Not to get derailed on it, but I don't know if I believe it's that Izzo devalued in his own mind what his brand was nationally, as much as it was he had a preferred method of going about recruiting and building his team. And that preferred method largely involved getting to know kids extremely well. And that also means those around them, their family, their support structure, and wanting to make sure that that he had a team that he didn't have to worry about things that maybe other programs do, that he had the depth of relationship with these guys that maybe other programs don't have. And because he knew them so well, and that kind of necessitated recruiting them from a distance where he could do that. He could get to know them well. I think that's changed for a variety of reasons, and he's not going to go down with the ship and have a lesser team from a talent perspective in order to maintain that. And I think that's why, in part, he's gone away. But I do think there is a point there with what Graham said and what you just said, that what he's finding as he's doing that more is that the message is received, very, very well. And again, that's something that, going back to Gonzaga, Mark Few, if you look back over the years, they historically had a lot of Pacific Northwest and definitely a lot of West Coast guys among the U.S. players they had. Now you are seeing a much broader scope of kids that they truly are national in terms of how they're recruiting. And so that's something that, again, it doesn't happen overnight. It takes time, but that's what's so impressive to me, maybe more than anything else, about what Gonzaga has done, is how steadily and consistently they've built and evolved that program to get it to the point where now, with Coach K gone from Duke, I don't think there's anybody in college basketball right now that you would say definitively in a head-to-head matchup, on just an average kid, the average elite player, that you would say, well, Gonzaga's was working from behind in terms of perception or prestige. It's just not the case.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's some other programs, but at worst, you're saying they're on par with like Kansas and Kentucky.
Right. That's what I mean.
State,
but those
right?
programs don't have, you don't look at any of those programs, at least in my opinion, and say with the average great player, and say, well, Gonzaga's working from behind. I mean, obviously there could be given situations where those programs will have an advantage over Gonzaga, but I'm just saying in the abstract,
Oh
you
yeah,
might have
for
said
sure.
that about Duke with K, but Duke with John Shire, even though he's recruited incredibly well so far, I don't think it's the same. At least I'm not ready to say that.
Well, let's talk about the game. so the Bulldogs are ranked number 2, like I said. They have had one common opponent, sort of. Both Michigan State and Gonzaga played Tennessee. Michigan State in a scrimmage that was closed. Gonzaga in an open exhibition game that was televised. The Bulldogs are 1-0, just like Michigan State, with a 104-63 victory over North Florida on Monday. And they're led by 6'2 sophomore from Seattle, Nolan Hickman. He's the point guard, and he averaged 5.1 points a game on 44, 31, and 67 shooting as a freshman, playing about 18 minutes a game. And the last game, he had 6 points, 5 assists, and no turnovers against North Florida.
Yeah. This is where Gonzaga is in an interesting spot and relative to recent years. And Nolan Hickman, to be fair, this was a kid who was originally committed to Kentucky, if I remember correctly, decommitted, went to Gonzaga. Again, now he's a Seattle kid, so he is for the Pacific Northwest, but still, that says a lot about it. It wasn't like Kentucky decided to recruit over him. It's, they he just decided to go to Gonzaga. He's a very high, we're talking about I think he was a McDonald's All-American, but he's definitely like a top 30 type kid. So an elite high school player. And he played last year. He certainly played a role, but he wasn't coming right in and becoming the guy by any means. Well, now he's their point guard. And he had a solid game against North Florida, the 0 turnovers to 5 assists they'll like. But Gonzaga the last 2 years has really had an incredible run with point guard play. So 2 years ago, they had not only Suggs, who was just a remarkable physical talent as a freshman, but they also had Andrew Nembhard, the Florida transfer. And then last year, Suggs was gone, but Nembhard was still around. And they just have had high level point guard play. And the sense that I get from expectations around this team and also some of how they played against Tennessee in that scrimmage is they're not sure yet whether they've got anything close to that level at the point. Hickman's a guy, again, very good reputation as a recruit, a lot of talent, but there are questions as to what level of play he's going to give them at a very, very important position. Particularly defensively, there are real questions around this perimeter group. Mark Few has built Gonzaga largely around the concept of great offense. And in fact, for a long time, defense was considered their Achilles heel. But if you look at recent years, I mean, they've never been like a vintage Tom Izzo team, but they've gotten better as a defensive group, in part because they've had a lot of good length all around the roster, all around the floor. They don't have as much of that on the surface this year. And that scrimmage against Tennessee in the second half, and look, Tennessee's a very, very good team, but Tennessee in the backcourt just waxed them. That's where they took a 5-point halftime deficit, ended up winning by 19. And it was largely around guard play. So that's where the concern is. Gonzaga's got talent, but there are questions.
So next would be Rasir Bolton, 6'3 senior. He's in his second season at Gonzaga. He played for Penn State and also Iowa State. He averaged 11.2 points a game on 50, 46, and 82 shooting, and had 11 points on 3 for 4 against North Florida from 3.
Yeah, and people may remember Rasir Bolton was the guy who had a very unfortunate incident with his head coach at Penn State, Pat Chambers, that actually didn't come out, if I remember correctly, until he had already done a year at Iowa State. He'd already transferred and left, and then the story came out, if I'm remembering, if I got my timeline right, about a racially charged exchange, which ended up leading to Pat Chambers' dismissal. So You may remember that about him. You may remember that he was a very effective scorer for Penn State. Moved on to Iowa State, was good there, and he's been very good at Gonzaga. He is a big time shooter above and beyond anything else. So that's what, if you're a Michigan State fan or you're Michigan State's team, obviously, that's what you're concerned about is can you do a decent enough job holding Rasir Bolton in check from three? Because he's just a pure shooter.
Next would be forward Julian Strother, a 6'7 junior. He's a returning starter, averaged almost 12 points a game on 50, 37, and 71 shooting last year. And he put up 16 and 5 in the opening game against North Florida.
Yeah, and I think the sense I have from doing a lot of reading and prep for this around Gonzaga is if there's a guy who seems likeliest to be their breakout player, and Gonzaga's had this happen a lot over the years where, they have a guy who's a solid, role player or starter, but maybe the fourth option, let's say. And then as they get older, they become the focal point. If they had a guy on this team that would fit that bill, he would seem to be the likely candidate. Good, not great jump shooter last year, but I think they believe he's got another level in him, and he can do more than that. He's not just a jump shooter. So yeah, he's another guy you really have to watch in terms of his ability to put the ball in the basket, particularly from the perimeter.
Yeah, I think that'll be a common theme with this Gonzaga team. A lot of guys who can score.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Next would be Anton Watson, 6'8", 225-pound senior. He's a hometown boy, and he's started 17 games as a sophomore, but has generally been a reserve. He had a bigger role this season, expected to have, and he's averaged 7.2 points and 4.7 rebounds a game last season on 54, 23, and 70 shooting. And he had 10 and 4 in the opener against Northern Florida.
Yeah. A little bit of a return back to the rest of the world for Gonzaga. And that's not to knock him because he's a good player. But if you recall, last season, their four-man was Chet Holmgren, who was just a freak
good, right?
he was just a freak of nature, 7'1", a legit three-point shooter, and also gave them rim protection. Well, they're not going to get those same things from this guy. In fact, that's the only real, he's been a solid player, but the real knock on him offensively is over his first 3 years, he's never really been able to develop into a stretch four. So, that's not ideal for Gonzaga. I think much like with Tom Izzo's offense, ideally Mark Few would like to be able to get some jump shooting from somewhere in his post combination. And he really doesn't have that, either with the two starters or with the primary front court reserve they'll play. And oftentimes that is a weapon that he has over the years at Gonzaga. He doesn't really have it this year. So I've seen some Gonzaga fans as I've done my research for this game, talk about how they would like to see maybe Gonzaga to go small and surround Timme with essentially four guards to get more of that. But I don't see that happening, at least not yet. So it'll be an interesting contrast to Michigan State, where both of the guys who play four absolutely are stretch threats.
Yes, right. Yeah. Yeah, that's almost the entire team at Michigan State is a threat from deep. So finally, Drew Timme, aforementioned player, one of the favorites for National Player of the Year, 6'10", 235-pound senior, averaged 18.5 points a game and almost 7 rebounds a game last season on 59, 29, and 6 shooting. That's more than 6. Had 22 and 2 boards in the opener against North Florida.
Yeah, boy, if you're building a high-level college basketball program, to get the career that Gonzaga has gotten from Drew Timme is just about the perfect thing you could ever ask for. In part because they've kept him for 4 years. And to get a guy who, his freshman year, he was a reserve, he was a productive reserve, but he wasn't the main guy by any means. But then the last 2 years running, and certainly this year again, you're talking about a guy who's in the first team All-American National Player of the Year mix, and yet he's never really been a serious threat to go pro. I mean, you never know when a guy will just make that decision. They've had enough, even if they're not a first round draft pick, and just decide to go, and they're done with college, but he didn't do that. And so you couldn't have asked for more if you were Mark Few. I really, not that it took a genius to recognize this, but I will, because we haven't seen Gonzaga, at least in a game that counts, since he's been there. But I'll bring this back up. For a few years running, I would go to Nike's EYBL event in Indianapolis. And that year, I was particularly interested in a couple of big men Michigan State was recruiting and were considered to have a great shot at. Three of them, actually. Vernon Carey, who ended up going to Duke, Isaiah Stewart, who went to Washington, and then Trace Jackson Davis, who went to Indiana. Michigan State was heavily in the mix with all three of those guys. But I saw Vernon Carey play Drew Timme, and Drew Timme was a guy who was kind of on the fringe of things. He was from Texas, but as I mentioned, his dad went to or was from Michigan, was from the Muskegon area, if I remember correctly. And we have a poster. There's a poster both on the Spartan mag board and actually, and thanks for doing this, has been active on our own message board. I believe his handle on our board is Oxford Strong. Mm-hmm. But he played high school basketball with Drew Timme's dad. So he was way early on Drew Timme as a serious prospect. And so by the point in time that I saw him, Drew Timme was like maybe a fringe top 50 guy. And I saw him play head to head against Vernon Carey and just dust him. And Vernon Carey was considered the number one player in the country at that point. I'm not sure whether he finished there, but he was considered to be as good as anyone. And Drew Timme just outplayed him flat out. And Michigan State had I don't recall if Izzo saw it, but I know they had an assistant watching that game. And I remember posting at the time on the Spartan mag board saying, they've got to get involved. This guy is note perfect for Tom Izzo. He plays with a chip on his shoulder. He's incredibly skilled in the post. His work rate is phenomenal. His motor, he's constantly moving. He'll run the floor. I just thought it was perfect. And unfortunately, by that stage, Gonzaga had already built such a relationship that, and MSU didn't get involved immediately. I think it took them another maybe month or so, if I remember right, to offer. And by that point, it was just too late. He'd already fallen in love with Gonzaga, and that was that. And you can't argue that he made a bad choice. I mean, he's been featured there. He's been to a national title game. He's been to at least one Final Four, maybe two. I don't recall. And been a headline guy, and I'm sure has done well. I don't know this for certain, but I would assume has done very well for himself in NIL. As high a profile college player as there's been over the last couple of years. He poses a real problem for Michigan State because you're talking about a guy who's always been incredibly skilled, great footwork, knows how to finish, knows how to use angles, knows how to use his body to create space, plays very smart, has a great motor, so he's constantly coming. And now add in that he's a senior. So he's seen everything, I think this putting it mildly, he's an incredibly tough cover, and he's going to pose a real challenge for Michigan State. Now, the one thing he's not been able to do, which frankly has surprised me, because I thought seeing him at the point I did in high school, I thought he already showed enough signs of this, just watching him shoot warm-ups, that I figured, by now he'll have certainly added a three-point shot. He hasn't really been able to do that. And I think that plus, less than top tier athleticism and the fact that he's not a very good defensive player is what's kept him in the college game, what has not made him an elite pro prospect at the NBA level, at least. So it's not as if he's a perfect player, but boy, the things he does well, he does as well as anybody in recent years. I mean, he's kind of what, and I'm not saying they're exactly the same player, but Drew Timme is what you have to hope Jackson Kohler becomes a reasonable facsimile of, to one extent or another. I'm not saying he'll ever be quite that level of player, but you get my meaning. Like that
Sure.
is the ideal for a kid like Jackson Kohler. His strengths and weaknesses is to be what Drew Timme is.
So you mentioned Timme is, from an athletic standpoint, maybe not on par with other players. Do you think that is his rebounds of only 2 last game? I mean, because I'm assuming he's playing almost 30 minutes against North Florida. Do you think that's he's more not going to guy? He's going to get a range rebound. Do you think that's another weakness of his?
Yeah, I mean, look. Gonzaga is not they're not an elite rebounding program, and they never have been under Few. We'll return to that theme a little later, but yeah, I mean, he's not as bad as 2 rebounds. Looks like. I think he averaged just a little under 7 a game last year, but
right.
Yeah, I think that can have an impact. Also in fairness to him, last year he was playing with another 7-footer in Holmgren. I mean, they had other guys who could rebound as well. But this year, at least on the surface, it would seem that they need him to be better than he's been in that area. And yeah, athletic ability, sometimes that can be part of it.
Well, let's go to the reserves end. We'll start with Malachi Smith, a 6'4", 205-pound redshirt junior. He's on his 3rd school at Gonzaga. He started at Wright State, where he was all-Horizon freshman. Then he played for a couple of years at Chattanooga and has now transferred to Gonzaga. He averaged almost 20 points a game on 49, 41, and 83 shooting, and also almost 7 rebounds a game last year.
Yeah, this is a good player, and he got up to a good start in their opener against North Florida. He was in double figures. He's the 6th man, but he's going to play a ton. Sometimes we're dubious about transfer up guys, where you're not sure just how good they'll be moving up a level. This is a kid where I think the belief is that most of it's going to translate. And so he's going to be a key guy for them in terms of giving them more offensive punch off that bench at the guard spots.
Next would be Hunter Salas, a 6'5" sophomore guard. Highly rated, didn't play a lot last year, but expected to do more this season. He averaged 4.3 points a game on 56, 26, and 71 shooting in about 14 minutes a game. In the opener, he scored 10 and had 6 boards in 24 minutes.
Yeah, good opener for him, but another very similar profile to Hickman in the sense that highly regarded guy that they won the recruitment for, beating out some heavyweight schools. And then just to show you how good Gonzaga's program has been, he averaged 14 minutes a game last year. So it's not like he walked in, most other places, the kids like these 2 guys would have walked into starting roles and been playing, at least 25 minutes a night. Not the case. But he's stepping up like Hickman is, expected to play a much bigger role. And as you say, he got 24 minutes the other night. This is not a particularly deep Gonzaga team. So I think it's penciled in that all these guys we're talking about are going to play heavy roles. Like you could figure they're all going to be at or above the 20-minute mark, I suspect.
Next would be Efton Reed. He's a 7-footer, 240-pound sophomore. Played last year at LSU. He averaged 6.3 points a game and 4.3 rebounds a game, starting for the Tigers. He had 8 and 8 in the opener in only 12 minutes, so pretty productive.
Yeah, and a key guy because they don't. They do have some other bigger players, but he's the only one besides Timme that is expected to be solidly in a rotation role. And so they need him to be productive. And again, it says something about the Gonzaga program. Kid, a very highly regarded recruit. Didn't have maybe the year that some thought he would, but he started every game for LSU. So we're talking about a guy who was starting and playing a ton at an SEC program. And he opts to transfer to Gonzaga, where at least for this year, he's a backup.
Yeah.
It tells you something. It's the kind of move that, frankly, Duke and Kentucky make. I mean, you look at Duke. Duke did that with adding Ryan Young from Northwestern and Grandison from Illinois, both of whom played heavy minutes at their Big Ten programs last year and would have been focal points this year. They opted to transfer to Duke to play lesser roles, right? Kentucky's had examples of this over the years too. And now Gonzaga apparently is able to do it. But Reed is a key guy. I mean, they will play him sometimes in a twin tower lineup with Timme, but mostly he's going to be, I think, the guy to give Timme a break, because Timmy's never been like a 35-minute a night guy. They feel like they need to get him some rest in order to get the best out of him. But we'll see with regard to Reed how he develops.
Yeah, you'd also suspect with Timme not being a great outside shooter that it becomes a little bit of a liability. Although I guess their other four is not really great outside shooters.
It's one weakness with this team. They've got plenty of shooting from the backcourt, but they don't have, Michigan State probably doesn't need to be overly worried about pick and pop in this game. It'll be a surprise if Gonzaga does damage that way.
Next would be Colby Brooks, a 6'7" sophomore. He scored 4 points in the opener, and he's sort of a spot duty guy who will come in as the ninth man.
Yeah, and a former walk-on. Again, this is, I think, largely, I've mentioned a couple other guys here at the end, but as I look at it, to me, this looks like an 8-man rotation.
Yeah, because the next one would be Ben Gregg, a 6'10" sophomore who's going to be backing up Timme and Reed, so probably you're not going to see him play outside of foul issues or injuries.
Probably at best you're talking about a similar kind of role to what Michigan State has Carson Cooper in this year, at least right now.
Well, let's go on to the 5 keys of the game. Number 1 would be guards. So we know that Gonzaga had a little difficulty with the Tennessee guards, like you mentioned. And Michigan State, obviously, the strength of this team, as far as we can tell right now, is the guard play with Walker, Hogard, and even Holloman and Akins to some degree too at this point.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be a really, really good test and opportunity for Michigan State's backcourt group. Do not get me wrong. Gonzaga has a lot of talent. Salas and the point guard were highly ranked recruits. Rasir Bolton has become a college star. He's a big time shooter. Malachi Smith was among the top transfer players in the portal last year. So there's talent here, but Michigan State has a couple things I think could play to their advantage at this spot. One is the word out of the Tennessee scrimmage was Gonzaga's guards were not comfortable when Tennessee got up into them. That was something that you really couldn't do to Gonzaga the last couple of years, because with Suggs and Nembhard, you had so much talent. In Suggs' case, just pure physical talent. And with Nembhard, you had a guy who was just so smart and so skilled that it was really hard to rattle those guys. The feeling was Tennessee in the second half of that game really got into Gonzaga in a way that they didn't when they played Michigan State. Michigan State played Tennessee much tougher. That is the word. That doesn't necessarily, transitive properties doesn't necessarily apply here. I'm not saying that.
If only.
Right. But I think with what we think we know about Michigan State's group defensively, can they disrupt these guys? Can they get into Rasir Bolton enough to maybe, force a 2-for-7 game from 3? That kind of thing. Can they do that? I don't think Gonzaga is going to be kicking the ball around. They're not a turnover-prone team. Even against Tennessee, they had single-digit turnovers. But it's not all about creating turnovers. It's really about disrupting what they want to do and making them uncomfortable. So can Michigan State do that? And then at the other end, again, from what I understand, the feeling is Gonzaga's guards are not as good defensively as what they've had in recent years. And we know that Michigan State is going to ask a lot of their guards offensively on the other side. So can MSU get, can Tyson Walker maybe get that jumper dialed in a little bit better than last night? And hit some of those open threes. Can AJ Hogard get to the rim and finish or create for teammates and, force Gonzaga's defense to account for him in ways they don't want to? Is Jaden Akins ready to take another step forward? That type of thing.
Yeah, I think there's someone who posted on our board the other day that Hogard, when he's in the game, the offense ran very smoothly. He was very effective, and when he went out, we really struggled a little bit more. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. And I feel like with Hogard, the one thing I mentioned that Grand Valley game, and I think it was to some extent the first half of last night's game as well, just a casualness and just not intensity that he probably needs to open up the game. And he can't. I mean, they can't afford to have any soft times during this game. This can be 40 minutes.
No,
of
casualness needs to be out the window on this one. That's for sure. Because for all I'm saying about Gonzaga's guards seeming like MSU may be able to get an edge there, look, there's enough talent that if MSU doesn't bring it with maximum focus and effort, they could get eaten up.
Next would be defensive rebounding. No second key to the game. Gonzaga is a very good offensive rebounding team, and this is going to be a staple for our keys of the game probably until Michigan State proves otherwise.
Handled,
right?
They're not historically a program that's done a lot of offensive rebounding. It's not a strength for them. And I don't mean that they're horrible, but they're never. I look back through like the last 10 years of KenPom numbers for Gonzaga, and I think they were in the top 30 in offensive rebounding once. So it's not a staple. And last year they were in the hundreds. They were outside the top 100. But if you are Michigan State, you've had trouble the last couple of years, even with less than great offensive rebounding groups. And we know Gonzaga has enough going for them offensively that if you get a missed shot and you don't end the possession with a defensive rebound, you are really flirting with disaster. You really are. You're giving Gonzaga a chance to bury you if you're giving them a lot of second opportunities.
The next key to the game would be transition. So this is Michigan State has not really looked themselves, I guess, at the transition game. They got it going a little bit last game, but they're going to need to really move a little bit more. And I suppose if you think that you might have a little bit poor defense at the guard position with Gonzaga, maybe you can exploit that a little bit and get into the lane, get in good position, and get to at least secondary break points too.
It's always interesting to see games like this and to see teams that don't see Michigan State with regularity, to see how prepared they are for dealing with Michigan State's break. And then on the flip side of it, how insistent is this Michigan State team in looking to run? Now, I actually thought they got better performance from Hogard, at least yesterday, than we did in the exhibition game, even though the fast break points didn't reflect it. I always talk about how in my mind, that's a misleading stat because I don't ever know how it gets calculated. It is always beyond me because it seems to defy oftentimes what I think I saw. But I think for Michigan State, and it's not even just about this game, it's this next sequence of heavyweight opponents. I think if Michigan State's going to hold their own and win these games or win their share of them, part of that equation, it's hard for me to see them doing that without getting something done on the break. That's so often when Michigan State has success, both in November and December, and then again in March, it's these kinds of equations where they're playing programs that don't see them every year and aren't really prepared for what the Michigan State break can do. And MSU takes advantage and uses the transition game as an equalizer. And I kind of feel like they need that here,
Number 4 key to the game would be the fives. And so this is what the position I think Michigan State fans were most concerned about going into the season. I'm less concerned in general, but definitely, going up against Drew Timme, the advantage has to be with Gonzaga until proven otherwise. And so this is going to be a real challenge for, can you not give up so much and maybe get enough on the other end to sort of keep it semi-even, right?
Right. Yeah. You're not going to have an advantage at the 5. We know this. But I think the challenge for Michigan State is, can you make Drew Timme work harder than he wants to, harder than Mark Few wants him to have to work in order to get his production? That should be theoretically possible to do. We're not asking for Mady Sissoko to go out there and outscore him. But we're asking for him, maybe you hold Drew Timme to, 8 for 18 from the floor, something like that. That's what you want to see. And I think that, again, Drew Timme, not the greatest defender. So can Michigan State get some scoring? Will they bring double and triple teams in the post the way Northern Arizona was? I would not imagine that they will, at least not to start. So, can Jackson Kohler get a little something humming when he's in the game? If he's being guarded by Drew Timme? Maybe, And again, I'm not saying that Michigan State's going to have any realistic shot to equal the production that Gonzaga gets at the 5, but can they make it challenging? That's the question.
You almost wonder if it's a little bit like playing Dickinson from Michigan, except Dickinson's probably got a little bit better outside shot than Timme. Obviously, Timmy's a little more skilled inside than Dickinson, but in some ways you're kind of playing the same sort of player, right?
Yes. I think all of the, they're all a little different, but the challenge is roughly the same for Michigan State. You're not hoping to outplay those guys. If you do, boy, you just, you do cartwheels, but you just want to make them work. If you look back at that, you mentioned Dickinson, the first game at Breslin, Dickinson had points, as I recall, like he produced for them, but Michigan State really took advantage of him at the defensive end, and they made him work a little more for what he got. Whereas in Ann Arbor, he just had a cakewalk. You can't give Drew Timme a cakewalk. You've got to make him work.
Yeah, that's probably as much preventing him from getting the entry when he's 4 feet from the basket. You got to at least make him work from a little bit further out, right?
It's work early in the possession. Yeah. I mean, I can remember vividly the last time Michigan State, and this is hard to believe, but the last time Michigan State played Gonzaga in a regular season game was all the way back in 2011, if you can believe that. It's been that long. Michigan State went into Spokane and beat them. And Gonzaga, and I'm drawing a blank on who their post players were that year, but they had some good ones. And I remember vividly talking about Michigan State's success in that game. So much of it had to do with the early defense they played. They didn't let Gonzaga's post players get settled in to the spots they wanted to be in. They fought them and made those guys catch the ball out a little higher than they wanted to, didn't make it as easy for them to get to the spots they want to be in. And, the challenge is different here. Michigan State's not rolling out Derek Nix and Adrian Payne and Draymond Green in this game. But and Gonzaga has a better player even than they had then in Drew Timme. But it's roughly a similar kind of thing. Yeah, you want to do your work early.
And finally, the perennial key to the game is turnovers. We have body work 2 games so far, the exhibition game and the regular season game, and Michigan State actually pretty good. I mean, last game, I think they had less than 10 turnovers.
They did. They had 9. Yep. So the 2 games combined, we're talking about an average of 11 and a half a game, which would be...
That's like 8 under our average for the beginning of the season usually.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It would be incredible. Look, Gonzaga is not a ball hockey team defensively, but we also know that Michigan State's problems, when they have them, oftentimes are more self-inflicted than anything else. Rarely do we run into an occasion where like, wow, that team just went and stole our lunch money. It's usually, why are we making these boneheaded plays? So that's always a possibility. And Gonzaga generally takes very good care of the basketball themselves. So you can't expect that they're going to kick the ball around much. It's the same as we always talk about this. If Michigan State has, a 3 or 4 negative margin in terms of turnovers, as long as they do a decent job on the boards, that's not a big deal, But if it's an 8 turnover gap, that kind of thing, that's where you start to probably run into trouble. because Gonzaga's too good of no matter how much they might struggle defensively, Gonzaga's too good offensively to where you can afford to give them that many more opportunities than you get to score.
Right. Yeah. You don't want an efficient offense getting extra opportunities and turning over or not cleaning up the boards, which is kind of like a turnover in some ways, is the same sort of effect.
Right. Right.
So the final key to the game is, can Michigan State make waves and win on an aircraft carrier? It's different for shooters. Everything's just a little bit off. You're playing outside. I'm sure all these guys played plenty of games outside growing up, but they don't probably play a lot outside anymore. And so there's no wind, there's no sun, whatever, no seagulls.
It's just different. This is our bonus sixth key, because I think it's important, and both teams have got to play in it. Right now, I have very general memories of that game against North Carolina, and North Carolina had an extremely good team, and there wasn't a lot known about or expected from that Michigan State team at that point in the season. If you remember, they ended up becoming a number 1 seed, Big Ten co-champion, Big Ten tournament champion. But at the point in time that game on the aircraft carrier was played, North Carolina was a heavy favorite. And North Carolina won that game, but it was a very competitive game. And it was the first glimpse of what we ended up seeing with that team, what developed. That, these guys are going to be better than people thought, because Draymond Green is actually not just a good role player, but a top tier college player, a guy capable of leading a team and putting it on his back, not just in terms of, emotion, but actual production. And, Keith Apley and Adrian Payne, they've gotten better. They look like they're actually the players that people expected them to be. And Brandon Dawson was a freshman who had so much athletic ability and toughness. It was our first glimpse at that, but it was a weird game. Now, this one seems to be a little less momentous in a couple senses. One, you don't have a figure like Obama, which, however you feel about him politically, had a presence, had a charisma. Yes. Joe Biden's not going to be there. Even if he was, he's not Obama. So it lacks that kind of gravitas, and it's been done. Now, it hasn't been done a lot, but this is not the first time. That was the first time. So it's a little bit different in that respect. All that said, it's the first time for all of these kids. And as you noted, playing outdoors, being able to deal with the depth perception. This is like they always talk about when you get to the NCAA tournament and you're suddenly playing in domes, that, you don't have that same shooting background. It's different. Well, this is that, to the nth degree.
Yeah.
So you wonder for two teams that I think expect to be pretty good shooting teams, pretty good jump shooting teams. What do we see in that respect? Does it do something to limit one or both of them? So that's something that I think is completely unpredictable, how these teams are going to adapt to the conditions. Then the other thing too, which is worth mentioning, is we really have to just pray that the conditions are good. If you remember, if I remember correctly, was it the second or third year? I don't even remember if they got a second game in, but one of those games when it looked like they were going to make this an annual event got canceled due to the court condition.
Yeah, like fog or something. Humidity was too high into the court. I guess the flight.
And then they
just
stopped playing them, until now, where it's been revived. I think that's for both teams. Obviously, you don't want anybody getting hurt, so that's a big deal too.
I would think in general that you're going to see worse shooting than you normally would, and maybe it's more important to have a good inside presence, which I think you'd probably give advantage to Gonzaga if that was the case. If you're looking right,
yeah. The only alternative to that would be, can Michigan State maybe make more of their guards getting to the rim than Gonzaga does? Right. I don't know.
Yeah, I can't wait till next year when they play in the submarine. So, moving on to the game, the line is Ken Pom has Gonzaga as an 8-point favorite in this game. It's obviously a neutral court. There's no Vegas line that we could find at this point. It's too far out from the game as we're recording this. I think that seems about right. I think for, where Gonzaga's ranked and where Michigan State is and from last season and, a lot of unknowns with the team, I think that's about right. I don't know. I mean, I think this is a game that we definitely could win, I think, but I could definitely see it going south pretty easily too.
Yeah, it's interesting perusing some Gonzaga message boards just to get a sense of the temperature of their fan base. It seemed to me, my observation was that, particularly coming off that Tennessee scrimmage where they just got blown out in the second half, I think the confidence level of that fan base, which isn't worth very much, but I'll mention it anyway, is that it seems to me their belief is this is not a national title contender right now. Mm-hmm. That they're hoping that over the course of the season they develop into that. But that right now, I saw a lot of comments about this is really like a top 15, top 20 team right now. Well, if you believe that, if that's accurate, then you'd say, yeah, Michigan State has a hell of a chance to pull it off. If you believe that Gonzaga truly is one of the two best teams in the country, well, maybe not as good a shot. I think it's a hell of a test anyway. And look, Michigan State fans, and I know they forget this every year, but you need to remind yourself, nothing is won or lost on December or on November 11th or on December 11th for that matter. This is an opportunity to get a level check, find out how good you are, whether the things that you thought you were good at, you really are. Perhaps your weaknesses are better or worse than you feared. And you begin to make adjustments. So it's very, very important to keep it in perspective. Now, speaking solely as a fan who probably, like everybody listening to this, sweats all these games out, yeah, you don't love just this murderer's row that this is sort of the kickoff of. You'd like to have a breather like last night. You'd like to have one or two of those in the mix. Not too many, but one or two of those, and they don't have that. But the upside is there are opportunities here for this Michigan State team to gain confidence and to begin to believe in themselves and develop a little bit of a sense of what they can be with this group. And I think that's the way you gotta view it. If it goes well, okay. You've played a very good program. You've learned some things. You've gotten better. And if it doesn't go as well, okay, you've learned where you got to improve. And that's really it. There's not a lot of downside to these games from where I sit.
I totally agree. It's not like college football where you lose a game like this and now you're out of the playoffs, or maybe you get lucky. You have to win every other game after this. You can risk it all the time, and it's only upside really, unless you're getting blown up by 30 and every. But even that, nobody wants to go through that. But I will remind people, a Michigan State team that I saw get absolutely waxed at Ford Field in, I think it was early December that year, by North Carolina in 2009, ended up in the national championship game. Now, they had the misfortune of playing that same North Carolina team who did it to them again. But the point remains, they got to the national title game. They won the Big Ten. They won a regional. So the idea that, even a bad loss is some kind of death sentence is ridiculous. That's not how this sport works. And it's not how Tom Izzo's ever worked. So, I say all of that, but I'm not saying that because I believe, Michigan State's really walking into a buzzsaw and it's a definite blowout. I don't believe that. I think they've got a chance to win this one. And even if they don't win it, if they're competitive, I think that's going to breed further confidence for this team, and so look, enjoy it. It's a high level game. I'll also drop one more stat, which maybe will make Michigan State fans feel a little better about this. I don't know. Michigan State's played Gonzaga 5 times in the history of the programs. What's Michigan State's record against Gonzaga? I saw him beat him once in person. In overtime, right? I think at Breslin, yeah.
Yeah, they're 4-1. The only loss was that, I believe it was triple overtime. was at least double
In Maui,
overtime in
yeah.
Maui against where Adam Morrison and Maurice Hager just had a shootout for the ages. One of the great college basketball performances you'll ever see. 4-1. Now it's been a while. In recent years, they haven't played in a live game. They've scrimmaged Gonzaga a couple times, and reportedly Gonzaga won those scrimmages. But 4-1 is 4-1. So if you're looking for something to hang your hat on as a Michigan State fan who's not feeling too confident, I've thrown you your bone.
Absolutely. Well, I think we'll wrap it up there. The game, of course, is Friday night on ESPN. It's, I think, 6:30 p.m. So it should be in daylight, right? I think that
at least a tip.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's going to be, I'm trying to think what is a Pacific time. It's going to be like 3:30.
3:30.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. The game itself will be absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, it's almost getting to the winter solstice here. So we're already getting to close to the dark at 5 or a little before 5 now here. So, this is just part of living in Michigan. So I'd encourage you again, if you've not had an opportunity, go to the Final Four is not on the schedule.com, or if you're lazy, tffinots.com. You can join our online Spartan community for free. You can also support the show, which we greatly appreciate. You can go to tffinots.com/support. There you can give either one-time donations through PayPal or Venmo, or become a monthly patron through Patreon. And also, if you've not had the opportunity, go to your podcast player and leave a 5-star rated review for us. We'll be here back with the post-game analysis. And until next time, the Final Four is not on the schedule. Go green.